From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. Hey, James, it's great to be back with you again.
Oh, it's great to be back, Steve.
I'm glad we got a chance to chat, and it's been, we've really been at this for some time, and I'm glad we're going through some of the topics that we're going through. And I think this one might be one that is going to gain a good amount of interest, and I believe other programmers will appreciate as well. What I thought we would talk about today is why is programming so complicated and costly and time consuming? It's become this black eye. It's one of the reasons that people choose configuration, or frankly, they say, hey, what do I need program systems? Are they needed? Or do we have to provide the customization, or is there a better alternative that's going to be a better fit for clients? So I figured I'd throw that out there, and I have a bunch of thoughts about it, and wanted to get you to share some of yours as well.
No, I think this is a very good topic, and I kind of have a feeling it might be a hot button item between programmers, and you can even say clients or project managers when they are programming. They're setting up the billing stuff. I kind of look at it as programming is something that's not seen. So like people don't understand the value of it to the extent. Like, you know, if you throw a 4K TV up next to a 720p, a user can see the difference, but they can't see a difference in coding. Except for unless you do a really bad job, I mean, a horrible job at coding or anything, but all they see us as a line item on their bill, and they're like, why?
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like too, we get into the fact that, you know, programming produces outcomes. Outcomes are what people appreciate, to your point there. But the effort that goes into programming isn't really truly realized, because it's not, there's so much more that needs to be considered than just typing on a keyboard.
Yeah.
As we've talked about in previous shows, the idea that you have to plan, and you have to also work with some devices or situations that are unpredictable, and also testing and troubleshooting, which we recently covered. All those things fall under the programming domain. You know, from a third-party perspective, I could even add more to that, because we have the variables of who are we working with on the other end. Because if you're not installing the system, the programmer still has to make it work, and you have to work with whomever is installing to make sure that all the devices are talking and that everything's doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Oh yeah, definitely. It kind of reminds me of a keynote of a graduation I heard. I don't know who actually came up with the quote, but it was very interesting, and I kind of use this analogy a couple of times. And it was talking about, there was this factory, and the machines broke. It was big machines, shut down the whole factory. Manager's flipping out. He's like, we're losing all his money, hourly, because the machines aren't running. They call a technician in. The tech came in, opened a panel, turned a screw, shut the panel, everything fired up. And managers are like, oh, great, you just saved me tons of money, but praise him up and down. Then the tech handed him the bill. It was like $1 million. I don't remember the exact price, but say $1 million. Managers started flipping out. Why did it cost so much? All you did was turn a screw, blah, blah, blah. You're ripping me off. And the tech goes, it was $1 to turn the screw and 99.4 to know which screw to turn.
I love that story. Actually, I've heard that in several different formats, and it's so true. Yeah. It's so true. It's the knowledge that you possess to know how something should be programmed in order to be able to do it properly. And that's also the difference, quite honestly, between hiring somebody who's just a programmer, just, your run of the mill programmer and an AV programmer.
I totally agree, because I mean, a regular programmer, they know software development and stuff, but they don't know the AV side. So you kind of got to get someone who has a knowledge in both, really.
The thing that I also like to talk to people about is the fact that we can control those costs. We can make things less complicated, but it requires that upfront work and the proper planning, and there are ways to curb costs, but we always need to be considering the different variables. So if we can eliminate variables, so if we can design systems more consistently, if we can pick equipment that we know works a certain way, gets back to the whole idea of modules and drivers. If modules and drivers available, that saves time. So instead of picking the latest and greatest wow piece of equipment that somebody may be pitching or may be on sale per se, pick something that is proven. There's ways to keep programming costs down, but there's also ways that programming can get unruly because of all the things that could go wrong when you press a button and it doesn't work.
Oh yeah, trust me, I had that this weekend. It actually did work. It was just the tech got this thing out of sync, and therefore it wasn't working the way he thought it would, but it did work.
I think that this is an important thing, though, and maybe it's something that we should see if our audience can weigh in on a little bit, and see if our audience can kind of help spread this message a little bit, because the livelihood of programmers really depends on justifying the cost of programming, the value that programming provides, and also the value that a programmer provides. We know that there's less of a tolerance for the one-off costs and having to reinvent the wheel. So I guess I'll throw it out there and see if maybe that's something that we can be getting feedback on for a future episode, or even have somebody help come on to talk about a little bit. But what are the things that you've done, and I say that as the collective view, to help to justify programming costs, or to help to understand or address all the concerns that people have about programming costs?
Oh yeah, that's definitely, I would love to hear what people are doing to justify the cost, because there's tons of ways to justify it. If you look at it as, do you bring in in-house, do you have a third party, because all those are different costs. I mean, let's just take higher education, for example. If they hire a staff member to handle the AV programming like they do in my environment, I'm a full-time employee. I get health benefits. They have to keep me on staff for as long that position's there, handling all that. And if we don't have a project, am I being assigned to something else, or am I being resourced that's being wasted if I don't have a project to work on? Or they could go out and hire a third-party programming company like Control Concept, which might be cheaper, but then what if we play devil advocate here and Control Concept goes out of business? Then what? Or say that the code doesn't work well, and now you're calling them in hourly to fix stuff that should have been right the first time. I am picking on Steve's company. I know they do a good job. Sorry about that. That was nothing personal.
It's some other Control Concepts,
Yeah.
not the one that I'm
Yeah.
associated with.
There you go. But yeah, or the integrators, and then you have integrator companies who the programmers may not know what's going on, and they're just line drawings and don't have that connection. And then who do you bring in to fix it? Because especially in higher ed, you go out to the lowest bidder, which is not always the bad case if you can scope it out where you put everything out correctly, then you're apples to apples. But if you are very vague in your project description, you may not get apples and apples, and you might get a bad seed there. So definitely, I think there's tons of costs to take into account, and I like to hear how other people handle it.
I like it, and we should save this for a future conversation. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. How do you scope out programming? Because that's something that I've heard looked at from many different angles. So why don't we save that for a future conversation and a future episode? But you bring up a good point too, and I'm curious. Maybe you can answer this. Is that so? So obviously you're a full-time employee, and you're I would imagine considered a fixed cost. Do you bill your time to a project? Does your programming effort get looked at, and do you have to justify it, or is it just considered a given?
I think I would say it's given, because I don't have to justify any of the time I'm working on any projects. It's normally like in higher ed, classes start when the classes start. Project has to be done. So I get those timelines of these rooms need to be working. And if it takes me normal business hours or extra hours, I'm not getting that extra like overtime in my new role that I have title. So I gotta get it done. So I don't have to submit timesheets and how long I worked on the program. And I kind of like that, because it's almost like my boss knows that I'm doing my job, and he's not micromanaging. He's like, you're going to get the job done, get it done. Like, I don't need to say, okay, I spent 20 hours this week programming 5 classrooms. Like, it's those 5 classrooms are done and we move on.
So it's almost, if you think about it, it's almost like taking a managed services approach. So they're paying your salary, and you are giving them the outcome. How you get there really doesn't matter so much, as long as you get the outcome and you're able to keep up with your workload. But what it does though is if you think about it a little bit, it kind of, if you have to go outside, then you really have no idea how much programming should cost, if you think about it. Because if for you there really isn't a particular price associated with the work that you're doing on a per system basis, let's say. I mean, you can estimate how much time it might take, but translating that into a cost, that may be one of the reasons why there's some discrepancy or a little bit of friction when it comes to why is something more so costly and takes so much time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never actually looked at it that way, because even in my role, I'm doing much more than just programming. So even if you take my hour salary, how much of that is actually devoted just to programming, I can't tell you unless I sit down and start mapping it all out, because I might be troubleshooting something here, and then 5 minutes later I'm coding, or I might be installing equipment or running to turn change a lamp in a projector, or anything that comes across our plate. So that's a good point there, Steve.
And if I just finish the thought a little bit too, if you look at it from an integrator or an in-house programmer for an integrator, they're a little different, because if their programmer is a significant cost for them, and they want to keep that person as busy as possible. So when they don't have enough for them to do, they're actually overpaying potentially for something if they have them do a lesser role, let's say, or just be idle. And then from a third party perspective, we usually work on a fixed price for a project, and we need to be able to estimate based on past experience or our knowledge of what is required, or our relationship with a client, what it might take to do something. So that there may be one of the reasons why we have this topic that we're discussing today.
Yeah. And again, like Steve mentioned, it'd be great to hear what our listeners, where they think the misconception or why programming costs so much is. That would be great to hear from them.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if, but both from a programmer's perspective and also from either a client or an employer's perspective too. So, with that said, why don't we wrap up, James? If you want to share where people can get in touch with you and how they could leave us some feedback.
Oh, as always, you can find me on Twitter at AV_James King. Definitely check out our podcast as you're listening to it now, but we're also on YouTube where we can respond to comments. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't use it as much, but I am on there, James King. I'm on the HEPA board, so anything going on with HEPMA, you can probably find me somewhere involved with that. And I write for the digital magazine higheredav.com, where I do the IT and AV column.
And for me, I'm on social media at Steve Greenblatt. LinkedIn is a great place to find me. I haven't been mentioning it a lot, but since James brought it up, if you want to learn about my company and check me out there, you can reach that Control Concepts at controlconcepts.net. And despite the hypothetical situation, we do take good care of our clients, and
Yes. Sorry about that, Steve.
no, there should be no alarm there, and I appreciate that, and it's all in good fun. So, with that said, this has been Ask the Programmer.